Algonquin Wilderness Park is a sanctuary for outdoorsmen looking for adventure. But on beautiful Canoe Lake, adventure has been known to take a particularly chilling turn.
My brother and I were on a canoe trip in the park. It was the morning of our final day. We were up early packing things away as the mist was still rising off the lake. As I began to pack the canoe, I looked out into the lake and saw a man in a canoe silently moving through the morning fog. Well, I was really surprised that anyone was up at that time of the morning. As I looked, I noticed he had this huge gash on the side of his face. So I called out to him.
Do you need help?
But he didn't answer me. He just paddled away in his canoe and disappeared into the morning mist.
In the shadow of Algonquin Park's interior, a forlorn specter travels the waterways in a ghostly canoe. A phantom spirit is said to be seeking revenge for a suspicious, premature death and the desecration of a late-night grave robbery.
Thompson was like the worst artist when he began. He was really bad. And we'd like to suppress some of the horrible things he did, but remember, he was a commercial artist. His whole family had painted, and he did too, as an amateur. And how did he become the artist that he was? It was through his friendships among what later became the Group of Seven. He took hold because of their help. It was only the work of his maturity that's of interest, and his maturity just lasted really 3 years, 1914 to 1917.
A lady named Irene Ewing knew Tom Thompson in her youth. She recalls watching him paint at a friend's cottage on Canoe Lake.
He truly belonged to the wilds. My grandmother told me of a fall afternoon when the trees have lost the last of their leaves. He stood and painted the scenery in front of him as she stood beside him and watched the wonderful ways that he reproduced the scenery.
Although Tom Thompson may not have known it at the time, the subject of the painting, Canoe Lake, would also be the setting for his untimely demise. It was a death surrounded by mystery. On July 8, 1917, Tom Thompson set off in his canoe to go fishing on nearby Gill Lake. 2 days later, his upturned canoe was found, but there was no sign of the artist. Ranger Mark Robinson knew something was wrong.
My grandfather was Mark Robinson, who was a ranger and kept a diary every single day. In his diary, he writes about Tom. I alerted the whole community, thinking that Tom must have been in some kind of trouble, for he had been missing for 4 days. We searched every inch of the park, but there was no sign of him. Then, on the 8th day, his body washes ashore in the last place he was seen. I still find it hard to believe. He claims Tom was a remarkable man who knew the park as well as any ranger. Many of us were astounded by his passing. Tom was a very strong swimmer. There's no doubt in my mind that on such a perfect summer's day, Tom could come to any harm.
As far as we can tell from the coroner's report, he went into the water unconscious, but he was drowned. His lungs are full of water. He got drowned in the water. So it's definitely a drowning. How did he get in the water? That's the question. Apparently he had trolling line around his leg. He had a graze on his forehead 3 inches long, his left forehead. So he may have fallen and hit his head on a grate. Or did someone hit him with his paddle? Because apparently they never found the paddle to his canoe. It is a great mystery. We don't know exactly what happened, and we may never know.
Locals speculated about Thompson's private life. A possible love affair with a young woman. Possible relationship with a distant novelist. A man who owed him money. Did these secrets have anything to do with his death? Perhaps one rumor held more sway than local gossip. The day before he went missing, there was a party at Mowat Lodge. Drunken revelry could be heard echoing across the water. Martin Bletcher, who lived on Canoe Lake, argued with Thompson about the First World War. Bletcher was known for his fiery temper, and before long, the two men came to angry blows. Fletcher warned Thompson to stay out of his way in the future. And perhaps this was not the last time the two men met before Thompson died. It is believed that Tom Thompson was unconscious before he hit the water. After all, how does a drowned corpse bleed? And how could the body have been so near, yet undiscovered, unless it was weighed down in the water? The bizarre events of the summer of 1917 were far from over for this small Algonquin community. Some days after Thompson was laid to rest, a man dressed like an undertaker arrived at Canoe Lake. He claimed to represent the Thompson family. He said he was to remove Thompson's remains and take them to be interred in the family's plot in Leith Cemetery in Owen Sound. Shortly after these events, Thompson's ghost made its appearance on Canoe Lake.
The way my grandfather told the story, he met this Churchill fella right at the town dock. He was to show him where the grave was. He was a sinister-looking guy. He wore a long black coat, and he had a slouch hat pulled right down over his eyes. He brought his own coffin, and he had a big black suitcase. Grandpa offered to help him. He thought they'd start the next day. But Churchill refused. He said he'd do the job himself, and he'd do it that night. Grandpa couldn't understand the urgency. Why did it have to be done right now? They got to the gravesite about 9 p.m., and Churchill sent Grandpa on his way, but told him to be back by midnight to help carry the casket back to the dock. Things just didn't seem right to Grandpa. He knew he was an undertaker and not a grave robber, but still, it made him feel scary and weary. But who was he to ask questions? After all, it was the Thompson family's wishes. When Grandpa returned to help take the casket back to the dock, the weight felt uneven and lighter than he thought it should be. Churchill said that the ranger had sent some men down to help him. But when Grandpa mentioned it to the ranger the next day, he said he didn't know anything about the procedure. But by then, it was too late. The coffin was sealed and ready to leave the park.
My mother was out canoeing on a calm day in the early 30s. She was on a fishing trip with Lorne Harris, one of the group of 7. He was her guide, and they had spent the day crossing the lakes of the park. It was getting towards dusk, and the rest of the party had gone ahead with my mother's boat trailing behind. As she came into the bay by the portage, she spotted a canoe coming out towards them. She said to her guide that someone was coming from the portage to meet them. Then, without warning, the paddler and his canoe simply vanished. There was no one making their ways towards them anymore. And there was nothing but themselves and the mist of the growing darkness on the undisturbed lake. The sighting caused a lot of controversy in the family. My father put it down to a mirage, but my mother always believed what Lorne Harris had said, that those who pass before their time continue to haunt the places that they love. And this was Tom, his good friend, in the place that he loved the most.
The apparition on Canoe Lake is forever tied to the death of Tom Thompson, one of Canada's most treasured painters. Visitors claim they can see, through the mist over the water, the faint outline of a ghostly figure paddling a canoe.